Maps lie. Darius had known this since childhood, when the old cartographer in the city library showed him worn scrolls with roads, rivers, and trade hubs marked on them. Maps are drawn by people, and people only go where it is not frightening. Everything else remains a blank spot with the note unexplored lands, or, if the cartographer was an honest man, simply nothing, a bare piece of parchment without a single line. The northern forest of Tavra was exactly such a spot. Officially, it was considered impassable. Too dense undergrowth, too tall trees, too many rumors about strange night sounds, and about hunters who went there either returning after several days without memory and without equipment, or not returning at all. No one sent expeditions there. No one placed outposts there. No trading company laid a route through it. Darius entered it by pure accident. Not out of bravery, not out of duty, not out of great destiny. He simply lost his horse at a swamp crossing, lost the trail in thick fog, lost his compass in a river, and then lost even the very sense of direction, because here the sun always hid behind the crowns of trees the size of city towers. The trees, by the way, were the first sign. Not the trees themselves. Trees are big everywhere. But these were wrongly big. The roots rose out of the ground to the height of a person and spread to the sides like the walls of small rooms. The bark was so thick that one could carve a niche in it and sleep there without touching the living tree. The branches began at a height where ordinary trees already end at the top. Darius walked and convinced himself that he had simply ended up in a very old forest. And then he heard footsteps. Not the quiet, sneaking, careful footsteps of a hunter. Heavy, rhythmic, the kind from which the ground trembles slightly with each impact. He stopped, listened. 3 impacts. Pause. 3 impacts. Pause. Then the bushes ahead parted, as if they had been pushed aside not by a hand, but by an entire wall, and she stepped out of the shadows of the trees. Darius later tried for a long time to describe the first impression and lost his words every time. Not because there were not enough words, but because the mind refused to accept what it saw as reality and stubbornly tried to find a simpler explanation. Maybe an optical illusion. Maybe the fog distorted proportions. Maybe he had simply been walking for too long and was now delirious. But no, the woman was about 3 meters tall. Not just large. A real giant with shoulders as wide as a good cart, with arms almost as long as Darius himself, with legs, each of which was like a young tree. A sharp face, cheekboned, with dark eyes that looked at him the way an experienced hunter looks at an unfamiliar track. With curiosity, with caution, and without the slightest fear. She wore leather armor made of something very thick and clearly very durable. At her belt hung a spear which, by its size, looked more like a young pine sharpened at one end. On her forearms were bracelets of bone and metal, each the size of a small shield. She looked down. At Darius. Darius looked up. At her. For several seconds no one moved. Then the woman tilted her head slowly, like a tower that was beginning to turn, and said something in a language Darius had never heard. The sounds were deep, chesty, with a rhythm that was felt more in the rib cage than heard with the ears. Then she looked around and called the others. 5 more came out of the forest, all 3 meters tall, all women, all armed. Darius slowly raised his hands. "I am not an enemy," he said in human language, understanding that this was most likely useless. "I just got lost." One of them stepped forward, bent so low that her face was roughly level with his face, and began examining him. Literally, like a curiosity, her gaze moved over his height, over his hands, over his clothes. Then she reached out and carefully, with 2 fingers, took him by the jacket and lifted him. Darius hung in the air, dangling his legs. The woman made a short sound which, judging by the reaction of the others, meant something like amazement. And then Darius understood that here he was not a dangerous stranger. Here he was an exhibit. They carried him for almost an hour. Not in a cage. Not tied up, they simply held him by the shoulder with 2 fingers, the way one holds a kitten found in the forest and carries home to show the others. It was humiliating exactly enough to make Darius decide not to twitch, not to shout, and not to do anything sudden until information appeared. The settlement opened up suddenly. The forest parted, and Darius saw a village of giants. Huge log houses, raised on stilts 3 human heights high. Wide yards, trampled to stone hardness. Animal pens in which beasts the size of small horses grazed, although Darius was not sure of their nature. Weapon racks by every house. Huge bonfires in the center of the square, over which hung cauldrons, each of which could fit a small bathtub. And everywhere women. Only women. All 3 meter tall, all powerful, all looking at Darius with the same expression, a mixture of amazement and distrust, as if someone had brought a living toy into the village. They set him on the ground in the center of the square. A crowd gathered around him instantly. Darius stood, surrounded by a forest of legs waist-high, and slowly looked around. The giants talked among themselves, pointed at him. Some leaned closer with unconcealed curiosity. Several young ones, clearly very young, squatted down and stared straight at him, not hiding their childish delight. One of them reached out and tried to touch his hair. "Hey," Darius said. She pulled her hand back, then laughed low, booming. The crowd responded with noise, and then it parted. She walked in such a way that the ground under her steps did not simply tremble, it seemed to respect each impact. The chief of the tribe was about half a head taller than the others, which made her about 3.5 meters tall. Dark hair, gathered into a complex construction of braids and metal hoops. A regular face, with a heavy gaze in which there was neither malice nor softness, only assessment. On her shoulders was a cloak of dark hide with embroidered symbols. On her arm was a bracelet in the form of a ring of cast metal, which, apparently, served both as decoration and as a weapon. She stopped before Darius, looked for a long time, then slowly, ceremonially, went down on one knee so that her face was roughly level with his. Even like that she was larger. She studied him for several seconds, then said something short and sharp. From the crowd came an older woman with long silvery hair and a complex necklace. Apparently, an interpreter or advisor. She also bent down and spoke several words in another dialect more slowly, with obvious pauses. Darius frowned. "I do not understand you." The advisor tried again. Then again, Darius raised his hand, slowly and noticeably, and said clearly, Human. I got lost." The advisor listened to the sounds. Said something. The chief answered. The conversation, resembling an attempt to feel out at least some common word, continued for several more minutes, until Darius tried something else. He crouched down, took a branch from the ground, and drew on the trampled earth. A tree, a human, a question mark. The advisor bent down, then looked at the chief, then again at the drawing. And something happened in her gaze, something like understanding. She pointed at Darius and pronounced one word. He repeated it uncertainly. She nodded, and first contact was established. In the evening, he was brought to something resembling a council. A large house in the center of the village, whose ceiling height was such that Darius felt like a mouse in a barn. A long table made from a whole tree trunk. Around it were the elders of the tribe, 7 women, each looking at him in her own way, some with curiosity, some with distrust, some with barely hidden threat. The chief sat at the head. The advisor stood nearby and performed the role of interpreter slowly, with mistakes, through gestures and separate words, but already much better. Darius understood the essence of the question rather quickly, what to do with him. Several elders, judging by the tone, suggested letting him go. Several leaving him. One, judging by the gesture toward the forest, suggested something less pleasant. Darius understood that he had exactly one chance. He stepped forward without waiting to be asked. Everyone fell silent. He looked straight at the chief and said slowly, with pauses, using several words he had already managed to remember, "I am small. I am alone. I am not an enemy, but I know how to make." He pointed at the house around them, then at the weapons, then at himself. "I build. I think. I am useful." The advisor translated somehow, with losses, but something got through. The elders exchanged glances. The chief was silent for a long time, looking at him. Then she pronounced one short word. The advisor translated, "Prove it." And Darius exhaled, because it was the only word he knew how to work with. They gave him a corner in a large household house. Not a room, a corner, with a blanket that was the size of a small tent, a pillow into which he almost sank, and a wooden bowl of food clearly not meant for his stomach, because it would have been enough for 3 Dariuses. He ate a little, lay down, looked at the ceiling, and began to think. The task was simple and at the same time deadly difficult at once. to prove the usefulness of a human 180 centimeters tall before women 3 meters tall, who clearly physically surpassed him in everything. Every object in the village was made for their size. Every tool too large for him. Every spear heavier than he was even capable of lifting. But he had an advantage. Not strength. Not size. Precision. Darius was a mechanic. Not by education, but by the nature of his mind. Since childhood, he had taken apart and put together everything he could reach. Locks, mill wheels, water pumps, lifting mechanisms. He understood how force works through a lever, how load is distributed through a block, how a small detail can be made to control a large structure. And this was exactly what the giants needed. He looked around the village in the morning, slowly and attentively, the way an engineer does at a new construction site. He immediately saw several things. Their bows were huge, but inaccurate, too long a limb, too rough a bowstring. They took prey by force, not precision. The structures were strong, but inefficient extra beams where one correctly placed one would have been enough. The water intake at the river required several women each time to walk with huge tubs, no trough, no system. Darius made notes on a piece of bark with charcoal and decided to start with a crossbow. The first problem was obvious. All the tools were too large. The axe with which the giants chopped wood in one swing, Darius could not even lift. The saw was as long as he was. The hammer was heavier than he weighed. He walked around the entire village, looking for something suitable. He found several things. A short cutting knife, which by giant standards was small, that is, about 40 centimeters long. A wooden cart pin, light enough to hold in his hands. A coil of sinew, clearly meant for something large. Pieces of metal in the forged scraps that the local blacksmith had simply thrown away as too small. Small for giants. Building material for Darius. A young woman named Aura, whom the chief assigned to him as something like a guard interpreter, watched his gathering with unconcealed skepticism. Why? She asked shortly, in her own language, but with a gesture Darius had already learned to read. Building, he answered. She crossed her arms. Small building. Small one. Darius looked up at her from below. You will see. She shrugged, a gesture that turned out to be universal regardless of height, and stepped aside, but did not leave. She continued watching. Darius cleared a corner of the yard and began to work. The idea did not come immediately. For the first 2 days, Darius simply studied the materials. He bent branches, testing elasticity. He pulled the sinew, testing strength. He measured the ratio of the length of the bow limb to the draw force crudely, through stones and ropes, but accurately enough. The giants' hunting problem was range. Their bows were powerful, but required such draw effort that aiming suffered. The arrow went where it was aimed, roughly, not exactly. At close distance this did not matter. But large game, which provided the main part of the tribe's food, ran away before the huntresses managed to get to the required distance. The crossbow solved this problem fundamentally. Mechanical drawing, not muscular effort at the moment of aiming. A fixed arc, stable release. A shorter limb with the same striking force, higher bolt speed. Darius began drawing. The scheme was not complicated in essence, but required precise proportions and the right material. He needed an arc of the right kind of wood, with even flexibility. A stock strong enough to withstand the draw of an arc almost 2 human heights in size. A trigger mechanism, a lever or catch, simple enough to explain without language. A bowstring from that same thick sinew. Aura watched the drawings with growing interest. On the 3rd day, she herself brought him a piece of wood without him asking. Darius looked at it, then at her. Thank you. She did not answer, but left with the look of a person who had done something right, although she did not yet fully understand why. Construction took another 4 days. The working crossbow turned out huge by human standards, the stock length almost 3 meters, the arc width about 2. By giant standards, quite manageable with one hand. Darius could not even lift it. But that was not part of his task. He asked Aura to call the chief. Aura shifted her gaze from the crossbow to Darius, then back, then left. 20 minutes later the chief came, and with her half the village. The crossbow stood in the center of the yard, aimed toward a distant tree, on which Darius had hung a leather target since morning. The distance was about 150 meters. The chief looked at the construction, at the target, at Darius. Small one built. Aura asked on her behalf. Yes. Why so big? Because you are big, Darius answered calmly. Several elders laughed. The chief did not. She went to the crossbow, bent down, examining the mechanism, touched the arc, pulled the bowstring, then raised her eyes to Darius. How does it work? Darius showed her. He explained through gestures, slowly and clearly, and Aura translated as best she could. The drawing mechanism, the lock, the placement of the bolt, the aiming line. The chief listened attentively, then took the weapon, drew the bowstring easily in one movement, with such force that Darius involuntarily stepped back, aimed, fired. The bolt went with a whistle and entered the target exactly in the center. The village fell silent. Then someone gasped, then someone else, and then such a noise rose that the trees around seemed to tremble slightly. The chief slowly lowered the crossbow, turned to Darius, looked at him for a long time and seriously, then said something shortly. Aura translated. The chief says, "Small one smart." Darius allowed himself a small smile. This is only the beginning. After the crossbow, the attitude in the village changed. Not immediately, not completely, but noticeably. Where before they had looked at him as a strange forest find, now they looked with curiosity of a different kind. No longer what is this, but what else can it do? Darius did not delay. He took on the water intake. Every morning, several women walked to the river with huge tubs and carried water back. It took time and strength, although physically for giants it was not difficult. The problem was different. During hunting, in winter, or in any crisis situation, there was not enough water because no one made supplies systematically. Darius proposed a trough. The village stood on a slope, and the river was higher in the terrain by about 10 meters. This meant that water could flow by gravity with a properly built channel. He again began with drawings. Again, Aura looked over his shoulder already without skepticism, rather with impatience. This time they had to build together. Darius directed, and the giants did what was physically inaccessible to him alone. Dug a ditch of the required depth, laid hollowed trunks, lifted and held heavy sections. This was his first joint construction, and it showed him something important. When the giants understood why, they worked not simply with physical power, but with precision. They were intelligent. Simply no one had explained the principle to them before. On the 5th day the trough worked. Water went through the village by itself. The blacksmith, a huge silent woman named Tara, stood at the outlet end of the trough and looked at the water for a long time. Then looked at Darius, then again at the water, then muttered something. Aura laughed. What did she say? Darius asked. Tara says, "The small one thinks better than the big one." Darius did not show how pleasant it was to hear, but he remembered it. Gradually, Aura turned from a guard into something between an interpreter, an assistant, and the first real conversational partner. She was younger than most women in the tribe apparently, about 20 years by their standards, which made her almost Darius's age. She had light brown eyes that could both mock and listen attentively at the same time, and a habit of sitting with her legs tucked under her, which lowered her almost to the level of Darius standing nearby. One night they were sitting by a small fire, and she asked, "Where did you come from?" "From the city beyond the forest," Darius answered. "There are many like me there." Aura was silent for a long time. "All small." "Yes. We have no people of your height." "None at all." "Never seen any." She was silent again. "We have also never seen such small men." "The chief thinks you are special." "I am not special," Darius said. "I am ordinary." "Then why do you know how to do what we do not know?" He thought. "Because I am small," he finally answered. "Small ones cannot take by force. Therefore they invent other ways." Aura looked at the fire for a long time. "That is good," she said quietly. "Or bad. It depends on what needs to be done." She smirked. And at that moment Darius realized that he had found his first real ally here. Tara ignored him for a long time. Not out of hostility. Rather out of professional distrust. A blacksmith looks at someone who climbs into the forge with a special expression, which in any language means one thing. You are in the way. But one day Darius came to her himself, with a scheme in his hands. It was a drawing of a block mechanism, a simple system of several pulleys and a rope, which allowed heavy loads to be lifted several times more easily than usual. Tara often spent enormous effort lifting blanks onto the anvil, not because she could not, but because it required full strength, which interfered with work. He placed the scheme before her. She frowned, took the drawing in her fingers carefully, which Darius noted. A blacksmith's hands know how to be precise. She examined it for a long time, then said something, and Aura translated. She says, "This works only if the metal is of good quality." Tell her that this is exactly why I came to the best blacksmith. Pause. Tara raised her gaze, then said something shortly, stood up, and went to the forge. Aura nudged Darius. Go. She says she will make it together with you. They worked for 3 days. Tara turned out to be not just a blacksmith, but a true master. She understood metal intuitively, felt the temperature, knew when to strike harder and when to let it cool. Darius provided the precision of calculations. She provided the mastery of execution. When the block mechanism worked and Tara lifted with one finger a blank that earlier had to be lifted with both hands and effort, she was silent for a long time, then looked at Darius and smiled for the first time, without words. But that was enough. The chief summoned him a month after his arrival, this time not to the Council of Elders, but personally to her own house, which was the largest in the village and at the same time the simplest inside. No unnecessary things. Only the necessary: weapons, maps of leather, several chests, and a long table. Darius entered. The chief sat at the table, and now, when she was not standing, the difference in height was not so overwhelming. She pointed him to a stool specially placed at the edge of the table so that their faces would be roughly on the same level. A small gesture, but important. Aura translates, the chief said. Aura nodded nearby. You came into our forest alone. You are not a soldier, not a mage, not a hunter. You are a builder. Darius nodded. You built a weapon, built water, built a lift for Tara. Now the village speaks about you. I have heard some things, Darius said carefully. Some say, let him go. You have done enough. Others say, keep him. You can do more. Others say, you are dangerous. Small, but thinks too much. Darius was silent. And what do you say? The chief looked at him for a long time. I say, you are not dangerous now, but you can become dangerous. That means you are valuable. So I stay? That depends on you. Darius looked into her dark, calm eyes. I want to stay. Not because I am afraid of the forest. Because there is something to build here. A long pause. Then the chief nodded. Then you will be our builder. Not a prisoner. Not a guest. She pronounced a word in her language. Aura translated, Tyros. It means, the one who does with hands what others cannot invent with the head. Darius slowly nodded. Tyros, he repeated. Yes, the chief said. Tyros. After the conversation with the chief, Darius's life changed again. Now he had status. Not just a small prisoner. Not just a strange outsider. But a person with a name, with a role, with a place in the tribe. And that place had to be held. He began to work systematically. First, a canopy for the forge. Tara worked under the open sky, which was a problem in the rainy season. Darius designed a covered workshop with special ventilation through corner slits, which carried smoke and heat outside, but kept the working temperature inside. Then a new scheme of hunting traps. Not pits, which required a lot of labor and gave unreliable results, but mechanical snares with a trigger mechanism reacting to the weight of the prey. He explained the principle through drawings, and the huntresses at first looked distrustfully at the small metal element that was supposed to hold a beast weighing several hundred kilograms. But the very first caught large beast forced them to change their opinion. Then the repair of the village's main house. One of the load-bearing beams had cracked, and the house was slowly, imperceptibly, sagging from the corner. Most in the village did not notice this. Darius noticed it in the first week. He explained to the chief what would happen if it was not repaired and received approval for the repair. It was a complex project. It was necessary to raise the corner of the house, replace the beam, reinforce the supports, and lower it back without destroying the walls. For a human village, this would have taken a week with a dozen builders. Here 3 days and 4 giantesses were enough, who under Darius's command held, raised, and lowered structures with such precision that any city crew would have envied. At the same time, Darius learned the language. Not systematically, he did not have a teacher in the full sense. But every day he learned new words, wrote them on bark with charcoal, repeated them aloud, checked understanding through Aura's reaction. Aura turned out to be a patient teacher. She explained not only words, but also meaning. Their language had a special logic. Nouns did not change by cases, but verbs carried within themselves an indication of who was stronger, the speaker or the one being spoken about. It was a reflection of a world in which physical strength was the measure of everything. Why do you have no men? Darius once asked directly. Aura was not surprised by the question. There are. Far away. A separate tribe. Are they also big? Bigger, she said shortly. Darius was silent. And you do not live together with them? We used to. Long ago. Aura shrugged. Then separated. Better that way. Why better? She looked at him with a slight smirk. Small one asks many questions. That is my work. No. Your work is to build. I build better when I understand why. Aura was silent for a long time. Then said quietly, because with them it was too loud. And too simple. Darius nodded. And did not ask the next question. Sometimes the best thing one can do is understand where to stop. Winter in the forest of Tavra was not simply cold. It was cruel. Frost so severe that the trees cracked at night like shots. Snow lay not knee-deep, but above the waist, that is, above Darius's head. Game went into the deep forest. Supplies that had seemed sufficient began to decrease faster than calculated. Darius met Winter with a plan already prepared. He had insisted in advance on building an insulated storage house with double walls and a layer of moss between them. He proposed a stock rotation system so that what kept worse would be used first. He designed reinforced chimneys for houses that were losing a lot of heat through cracks. But the main trial turned out to be something else. In the middle of winter, one of the young women of the tribe, Lena, the same one who had touched his hair on the first day, fell ill. She developed a fever that did not go down for several days. The local healer did what she could, but the fever held. Darius was not a healer, but he knew something about fever. He asked Aura to get several specific herbs, explained through drawings, and prepared a simple decoction according to a recipe he remembered from the city apothecary. Nothing magical, just the right combination of antipyretic and anti-inflammatory. He was not sure it would work, but it worked. 2 days later, the fever went down. The healer looked at him with a new expression on her face. Not hostile, not friendly, but the kind with which a professional looks at a colleague whom he had previously underestimated. Lena, when she got up, came to Darius, bent down to his level, and said something quietly. What is she saying? He asked Aura. Aura smiled slightly. She says, you are not as small as you seem. By the end of winter, the chief called him again. This time Darius already spoke the language of the tribe well enough to manage without Aura. Not perfectly, with mistakes, with pauses, with incorrect cases, but enough. The chief's name was Vera. Darius did not learn this right away. In the tribe they addressed the chief by title, and he heard the name only once, by chance, in a conversation between the elders. Vera sat by the fire and watched him enter. You survived the winter, she said. With your help. No, you helped us survive the winter. Darius sat opposite her. You were worried about something, he said directly. Vera was silent for a long time. There are other tribes in the north. They are not like us. They take what they need by force. And they come here? Every few years. They did not come in autumn, so they will come in spring. Darius thought. Show me the map. Vera looked at him. Why? Because, Darius said calmly, the crossbow and the trough are just tools. And the defense of a village is a system. And I know how to build systems too. Vera looked at him through the fire for a long time. Then she stood up, went to the chest, and took out a leather map. Placed it before him. Darius bent over it, and began to think. In spring, when the forest turned green and the snow left the lower slopes, Darius stood on the upper observation platform, which he himself had designed, and looked at the village. It had changed. New beams on the main house were visible. Metal pulleys by the forge gleamed. Water ran along the wooden trough. At the edge of the yard stood 3 crossbows on stands, already refined by Terra to almost perfect accuracy. Aura climbed up after him and stood beside him. They were silent for several minutes. Then Darius said, when they come from the north, we will be ready. Are you sure? No, but I know that we have more chances than we had. Aura looked down. Do you think you will leave someday? Darius did not answer immediately, because the answer was more complicated than it seemed. He had thought about it every day during the first week, then every other day, then once a week. And now this question surfaced more and more rarely, because every day here there was something that required his presence. I do not know, he finally answered honestly. Aura nodded. Good. Why good? She smiled slightly. Because those who know for certain that they will leave have already left. Darius looked at her, then again at the village, at the tower he had built, at the water he had started flowing, at the people who had become a little safer because of him, giants who had accepted a human because he did not try to appear bigger than he was. He simply did what he knew how to do, and that turned out to be enough. The map was old, drawn on tanned leather. It was the size of a small table and covered with symbols that Darius at first could not read. But Vera explained patiently, with pauses, poking her finger at each mark. The northern tribe was called Garo. They lived beyond 2 ridges, in a wide valley with rich hunting grounds. But every spring, when the winter stores ran out, they went south. Not to trade, not to negotiate, simply to take what was poorly placed or poorly protected. How many of them? Darius asked. Many, Vera showed with her fingers. It came out to about 30 or 40. And you? 22 fighters. The rest are workers, the young, the healer. Darius looked at the map. Do they always take one path? Vera pointed at a narrow passage between the rocks in the north. Here. Only here can one pass with a heavy load. Darius stared at this place. A narrow passage is not a defender's weakness. It is his main advantage. Any army entering a narrow bottleneck loses numerical superiority. 30 people in an open field are 30 blows at once. 30 people in a passage wide enough for 2 are just a queue. Have you ever defended the passage? He asked. No, we always waited here. So they reached the village? Yes. And what happened? Vera was silent for a long time. They took food. Sometimes weapons. We fought. They left. Losses? The chief lowered her gaze. Every time. Darius clenched his fingers. This year will be different, he said. Vera looked at him. You are a small builder, not a warrior. I am not going to fight, Darius answered. I am going to make it so that they will not want to fight us. In the next several days, Darius almost did not sleep. He walked around the village with a piece of bark and charcoal, took measurements, wrote down numbers, drew schemes, erased them, drew again. Aura followed him like a shadow and periodically translated his muttering when others happened to be nearby. The task was specific. Having 22 fighters against 40, one cannot fight in the open. A system was needed that would compensate for numerical inequality through control of space, surprise, and psychological pressure. He thought not like a soldier. He thought like an engineer. First, the narrow passage. A trap had to be made there. Not a pit, too simple and too easy to bypass. Something more complex. Darius remembered the principle of a swinging log, which he had once seen at a sawmill, where one heavy part set a system in motion. If a balancing platform were placed in the passage, wide on top, with the support point in the middle, then the first several people who stepped onto it would tip the rear edge with their weight, and those who had not yet entered would receive a blow from a log to the legs. Not deadly, but enough to break the formation and create panic. Second, side positions. On both sides of the passage there were stone ledges. Not high by giant standards, about 2 meters, but enough to place crossbowmen there, shooting from above, into the back and from the flank at the same time. Third, noise and fire. Psychologically, the first impression is the most important. If the attackers enter the passage and immediately meet fire, a crash, and an unexpected blow, their first instinct will be retreat, not advance. Darius sketched 3 schemes, then chose the one that could be built in 2 weeks. When Darius brought the schemes to the council, the reaction was predictable. Elder Bora, the one most skeptical toward him since the first day, looked at the drawing, then at Darius, then at the drawing again. The small one wants to stop Garo with pieces of wood, she said. Aura translated. Tell her, Darius answered calmly, that fortress walls are also pieces of wood. And nevertheless armies stop before them. Bora answered something sharply. She says we do not have fortress walls. Not yet, Darius said. Vera, who had been silent all this time, pronounced one word. Everyone fell silent. What did she say? Darius quietly asked Aura. She says, begin. Construction began the next morning. Darius divided the work into 3 parallel directions in order to make it in 2 weeks. The first crew, led by Terra, went to the passage and began preparing the base for the balancing platform. It was necessary to hollow out 2 deep grooves in the rock base for the support rods and hew 2 massive logs into the required shape. The second crew cleared the side ledges above the passage and built platforms there for the shooters. Small, hidden, with canopies of fir branches so they would not be visible from above. The third remained in the village and prepared ammunition, bolts for the crossbows, resin pots for fire, stones for dropping. Darius did not sit in headquarters. He walked between all 3 points, checking, correcting, explaining. Every morning, he got up earlier than everyone. Every evening, he lay down later. Aura once caught him over late drawings and placed a bowl of food beside him. "You do not eat properly." "I eat," Darius answered without looking up from the drawing. "No, you take a little and forget." He raised his eyes. "Are you watching me?" "You are our tyros," Aura said simply. "If you fall, who will build?" Darius was silent, then took the bowl. "Thank you." Aura nodded and left. He watched her go and thought that in this village care was expressed not in words, but in actions. No one says I am worried. They simply bring food, simply come to help, simply stay nearby. There was something very honest in this. The balancing platform turned out to be the most difficult element. The idea was simple: a wide wooden flooring laid across the passage, with the support point not in the center, but closer to the far edge. This meant that the first several people who stepped onto the near edge would at first feel nothing suspicious. The platform would hold because of the heavier far part. But as soon as the weight shifted beyond the balance point, the far end would drop sharply downward, the near end upward. Everything standing at the edges would either fall or be struck. In addition, Darius came up with the fastening of two side logs on hinges. They were held by a pin released by the same platform mechanism. When the platform activated, the logs swung in arcs into the passage from both sides. Not a killing blow, but one guaranteed to knock down. Terra implemented the mechanics with such precision that Darius checked the joints several times and did not find a single mistake. "Good work," he said. Terra nodded briefly, then added something. "What is she saying?" Darius asked Aura. "She says that for the first time she is making a thing that thinks." Darius looked at the mechanism. "This is not a thing that thinks," he said. "This is a thing into which thought was placed in advance." Aura translated. Terra looked at him for a long time, then briefly pronounced one word. "What?" Darius asked. "This is a word that for us means a person who is trusted with a tool," Aura said quietly. "For us, that is big." Darius nodded, and felt that something had changed not outside, but inside. The scouts brought news 3 days before the calculated readiness. Garo had already set out. Vera gathered the council immediately. Darius stood before the map and explained briefly, without unnecessary words, because there was no time. "The platform is ready. The platforms are ready. The crossbows are in position. Only 2 things are not ready. The resin pots need to be delivered to the passage, and the signal rope needs to be installed at the entrance to the forest." "Will we make it?" Vera asked. "If we leave tomorrow at dawn, yes." "Good." Vera turned to the elders. "Bora, resin pots. Lena, rope. Terra, check the crossbows once more." Bora muttered something, but nodded. The council dispersed. Darius remained alone with Vera. "Are you afraid?" the chief asked unexpectedly. He raised his head. "Yes." Vera, it seemed, had not expected such an answer. "You speak the truth." "I always speak the truth." "Why are you afraid?" Darius thought. "Because I built a system. But systems sometimes break, and I cannot account for everything." Vera was silent. A warrior also cannot account for everything. A warrior is used to that. "I am a builder. I am used to my calculations being either correct or not. There is no middle." Vera looked at him for a long time. "You are strange, Tyros. Probably. But you are honest. That is rare." She stood up and headed for the exit, then stopped. "I have seen many warriors who went into battle without fear. Most of them did not return, because not being afraid means not thinking." She looked at him over her shoulder. "You think. That is better," and left. Darius looked at the empty doorway for a long time, then returned to the drawings. Dawn turned out cold and gray. The forest was quiet with that special silence that comes before something important, not dead, but tense, like a drawn bowstring. Darius stood on the left platform above the passage and looked down. Below him was the platform, the path going straight north. On the opposite platform was Aura with a crossbow. Ria? No, not Ria. Lena. Lena with 2 other shooters. He corrected himself mentally. There was no Ria here. There was another world here. The other fighters had spread out across positions in the forest, 30 meters behind the passage as a second line. Vera was there too. She had wanted to go to the passage. Darius insisted that the chief had to stay at the second line, because if the first plan worked, her presence here was not needed. If it did not work, she was needed there. Vera agreed after a pause. That was important too, because accepting someone else's plan when you are used to acting your own way is also a form of strength. They had to wait almost 2 hours. Then the signal rope at the entrance to the forest jerked 3 times. Darius tensed, then exhaled slowly. Calmly, he said under his breath, The first figures appeared on the path. The Garo were larger than he had expected. Not 3 meters, almost 3.5. Broad, with heavy spears and short swords, in rough armor of bone and metal. They walked without much caution, talking loudly among themselves. People who were used to being feared. The first entered the passage. The second, the third, the fourth stepped onto the platform. The fifth, and then the sixth shifted the balance. The platform worked with such a sound as if a tree had fallen in the forest. The far end thudded down. The near end shot upward. For on it lost balance instantly. Giants flew downward more slowly than people, but fell heavier. The crash of their landing echoed in the stones. The side logs swung in arcs. The left one clipped two who had not yet managed to enter. The right one caught one of the fallen, preventing him from getting up. Outside the passage, confusion and shouts. Darius was already standing with a pot of resin. "Fire!" he shouted. Lena threw the first burning pot. It smashed against the stone at the entrance, and flames spread along the path before the passage. Not a wall of fire, a strip cutting off those who had not yet entered from those who were already inside. The crossbows began working. Shooting from above, in a closed passage where there is nowhere to dodge, is completely different from shooting in a field. The bolts went from above downward, piercing gaps in armor that was not designed for a strike from above. The Garo in the passage began to retreat. But outside the next ones were crowding, and there was no way because of the fire. Several seconds of pure chaos. Then Darius shouted again. "Second pot to the right." Lena threw it. The fire cut off the right flank. Aura held the center. Aura was already firing accurately, aiming not at bodies, but at weapons, knocking spears from hands, breaking the formation, not allowing them to organize. Darius looked at what was happening below and saw what he always saw in a well-working system. The elements do their job, and the overall result becomes greater than the sum of the parts. Then the Garo commander appeared in the passage. Huge, with the distinctive signs of a chief, with a sword in his hand. He looked upward, straight at Darius, and his gaze was not angry. It was surprised, because he was clearly trying to understand who this small silhouette on the stone ledge was, the one directing this madness. Darius held his gaze, then raised his hand, palm forward. "Stop." It was a gesture that required no translation. The Garo commander looked at him for several seconds, then raised his sword flat, a gesture which in any culture means one thing: pause. His people froze. Darius's people too. The forest became unexpectedly quiet. Only the fire crackled on the path. The commander said something loudly. Darius did not understand all the words, but caught the question. Something like, "Who are you?" or "Who is in charge here?" He drew in air, and answered in the language of the tribe, with mistakes, but clearly enough. "I am Tyros. Builder. Here is my home. You may enter. To fight, no?" Silence. The commander looked at him with unconcealed amazement, then slowly looked around. The platform, the side logs, the platforms, the crossbows, the fire, and looked at Darius again. "Small one." He finally pronounced one word, but with such intonation that the meaning was clear without translation. "Small one," Darius confirmed calmly. The Garo commander was silent for a long time, then said something quietly to his people, and his people began to retreat. Not run. Retreat slowly, with dignity. Darius exhaled so strongly that Aura, standing nearby, heard it. "You were not sure it would work?" she whispered. "I was not," he admitted. "But it worked. This time, yes." Aura looked down, where the Garo commander was the last to leave the passage. "Will they return?" Darius thought for several seconds. "Maybe, but next time they will come with a different conversation." There were no losses. That in itself was an event. Vera, stepping out onto the path after the Garo retreat, was silent for a long time, then said something very quietly. Aura translated without him asking. She says, "For the first time in many years, the Garo left without taking anything, and none of us is wounded." Darius answered nothing. He looked at his platform, warped but having worked, and thought that victory without losses is not luck. It is precise calculation. Then he thought that he was lying to himself. There had been luck too. The commander could have refused to stop, could have gone straight through, could have sent a flanking group through the forest. But he did none of that, because he saw the system. And a system is not just traps. It is a signal. They think here. They prepared here. They were waiting for you here. It is a different language than simply "we have more warriors." But the giants heard it. Tara approached the platform and began examining the mechanism, then said something shortly. She says she wants to make it better, Aura translated. Let her, Darius answered. Tara nodded, and within a minute she was already taking out tools. 3 days later, one came to the village. Without a weapon, with a white rag on a spear, a sign which, apparently, meant the same thing regardless of the size of the tribe. Bora wanted to drive him away immediately. Vera said, we wait. The messenger was young by giant standards, about 20 years old, broad-shouldered, with patches on his armor that Darius could not read. He spoke quickly, in a dialect that differed from the tribe's language, but was close enough to understand the main point. The meaning of the message was as follows. The Garo commander wanted negotiations. Not an ultimatum, not demands. Precisely negotiations. Vera listened, then looked at Darius. Your opinion, Tyros. Darius thought briefly. Go. It is always better to talk than to fight, especially if you have already proved that you know how to fight. Bora muttered something. Darius looked at her. What is Bora saying? Bora smiled slightly. She says the small one thinks too much about peace. Tell her that war is an expensive pleasure. Peace is cheaper. Bora listened to the translation, and this time answered nothing. The negotiations were appointed on neutral ground by the large stone halfway between the villages, which, apparently, had long been used for meetings and remembered many. 5 people from each side. Vera, Aura, Tara, 2 elders, and Darius because Vera said simply, you are going. The Garo commander turned out to be closer than he had seemed in battle. Tall, almost 4 meters. A scar across his left cheek. Light eyes, almost gray. He looked at Darius with unconcealed curiosity, not hostile, but the way one looks at something fundamentally new. He said something directly to Darius, not through a translator. Aura translated. He asks, are you real? Real, Darius answered. He says, we have seen small people. Very long ago. We thought they had all disappeared. Darius frowned. Where did they come from? The commander spoke for a long time, and Aura translated with pauses. The essence was unexpected. According to Garo legends, many generations ago small settlements of little people of ordinary height had lived in these forests. Then they disappeared, either left or died out. No one knew exactly, but they were remembered as builders and masters, people who made things inaccessible to giants. Darius sat and listened to this with the feeling that the ground was moving slightly beneath him. So he was not the first here. So this place had known his people before. What happened to them? He asked. The commander shrugged, a gesture as universal as Aura's. We do not know. They left one day and did not return. Darius grew thoughtful, then raised his head. I returned. The commander looked at him for a long time, then slowly nodded. And something in the atmosphere of the negotiations shifted from wariness to something else, for which Darius could not yet find the exact word. The negotiations lasted 3 hours. Darius barely spoke. He listened, watched, and sometimes whispered hints to Vera through Aura, where it was worth insisting and where to yield without losses. Trade of food in exchange for metal? Yes. Joint hunting territories? No, too early. The rite of passage through the tribe's lands for trade wagons? Yes, on condition of advance notice. Mutual aid in case of attack by third parties? To be considered. By the end of the 3rd hour, a piece of leather with the handprints of both chiefs lay by the stone. Not friendship, not an alliance, but the first treaty. When the Garo left, Bora looked at the leather sheet for a long time, then said something under her breath. Bora laughed. What? Darius asked. She says, the small one did what the big ones could not do for 100 years. Darius was silent. I simply suggested that both sides calculate what was more profitable. Exactly, Bora said. No one had calculated before. That same evening, Vera gathered the whole tribe. It was a ritual Darius saw for the first time, a large bonfire in the center of the village, everyone standing in a circle, the chief speaking slowly and solemnly. Aura whispered the translation into his ear. She says that the Tyros came from the forest small and alone. But he made us smarter, stronger, and safer. He built not for himself. He built for us. Darius stood and listened. She says, the Tyros now has a name in stone. This means that you belong to the tribe. Not as a prisoner, not as a guest, as one of our own. Darius felt something strange in his throat. Vera came up to him, went down on one knee again, that ceremonial gesture, and said something very seriously. What is she saying? He whispered. Aura was silent for a second. She says, you prove that size is not strength. Strength is what you build. Someone in the crowd began beating a rhythm with their palms on their thighs, slowly and powerfully. Then a second, then a third. Within a few seconds, the whole circle thundered with one rhythm. Darius stood in the center of that thunder, a small man among giants, and did not feel small. Life in the village entered a new rhythm. After the treaty with Garo, Darius received something unexpected: time. Not urgency, not survival, simply time and trust. And he decided to use them for something he had been thinking about since winter. A school, not in the human sense, not with desks and books, but a place where he could systematically pass on what he knew. The principles of the lever and the pulley, the properties of materials, load distribution, water systems, the basics of fortification. He explained the idea to Vera. She was silent for a long time. You want to teach us to think? No, Darius answered. You already think. I want to give you tools for that. What is the difference? The difference is that a tool can be passed on, but my thoughts cannot. If I leave, everything I have built will remain. But if I teach you the principle, you will be able to build yourselves. Vera looked at him for a long time. Why are you thinking about leaving? Darius had not expected this question. I am thinking about the fact that I will not be here forever. No one is eternal, Vera said. That is exactly why a school is needed. She was silent a little longer. Good. Lena became the first student. That same Lena who had touched his hair on the first day. The one he had healed in winter. Now she was, apparently, about 17 years old by giant standards, something like late adolescence, when one is already adult enough to study seriously, but still curious enough not to be afraid of new ideas. She came herself, without being asked. One morning, she simply appeared beside Darius while he was making calculations and said, "Teach." Darius looked at her. What exactly? She pointed at his drawing. This. He thought. Good. We will start from the very beginning. With the lever. He took a branch, placed it on a stone, put another stone on top near the edge. Look, if you press here, it is hard. If you press here, it is easier. Why? Lena frowned, tried it herself, pressed at one edge, then at the other, then looked at him with an expression he had already learned to read. It was the moment when something clicks. Because of distance, she said slowly. Exactly. Distance from the support point is force. Lena took his charcoal and drew the scheme herself. Incorrectly, but in the right direction. Darius corrected it. She corrected it again. And within an hour they were already discussing not just the lever, but its use. How to lift a log twice as heavy as usual, how to move a stuck stone, how to open heavy gates with one hand. By evening, Lena left with a pile of pieces of bark covered in schemes. Darius watched her go, and realized that teaching giants was not condescension and not duty. It was mutuality, because while he taught them engineering, they taught him something else. How to live without fear, how to trust the body, how to value what is built by hands, not words. One day, Aura brought him to the river. Not for business. Just like that, which happened rarely in the village, because here just like that usually meant something else. They sat on the bank, Aura with her legs crossed, which made her a little lower. Darius on a large stone by the water. Do you miss your own people? She asked. Sometimes, Darius answered honestly. Who exactly? He thought. One old man. He taught me to repair things. And city roofs. I loved climbing onto them and looking from above. Why from above? Because from below you see people. From above, how they are arranged together. Aura was silent. Here we do not have high roofs. But we have trees. She laughed, then said seriously, Do you want to return? Darius looked at the water. I do. Someday. To tell what I saw. What I found. And then? I do not know. Maybe you will come back here? He looked at her. Are you asking for yourself or for Vera? Aura looked away. For myself. Darius was silent. Then tell me directly. Why do you need to know this? Aura did not answer for a long time. Then quietly. Because you are the first small person I speak to not from above downward. Darius did not understand at once. Then he understood. And said nothing. He simply looked at the river. And Aura looked at the river too. And in that silence, there was something that needed neither translation nor explanation. Summer in the village was a time of growth. The first harvest under the new irrigation system gave twice as much as before. Darius's school had already taken in 5 students. Tara mastered pulley mechanisms so well that she began inventing her own modifications, which Darius himself had not thought of. And it was Tara who one day came to him with a question that changed the direction of the next project. She brought a piece of metal, dark, unusual, with a bluish gleam, placed it before him, said something. Aura translated, "Found in the northern rocks. We do not know what it is. Do you know?" Darius took the metal in his hands. It was unexpectedly light for its appearance, and at the same time very dense. Cold even to the touch. Where exactly was it found? Where Garo did not let us go before. Now they let us. Darius nodded slowly. Something new had already begun to form in his head. "I need to go there." Tara nodded without unnecessary words. And Darius felt what an engineer feels when he finds a material he did not know existed. A mixture of excitement, caution, and absolute certainty that this would change everything. At the end of summer, when the forest filled with dark green and the river became quieter, Darius stood on the upper observation platform and looked north. There, beyond two ridges, lived Garo. Now neighbors, almost allies. There, on the border of the valley, lay the rocks with the unknown metal. And even farther, blank spots on the map that no one had checked. He thought that a small man in a world of giants was not a disadvantage. It was another point of view, literally another height of sight. The giants saw the horizon farther. He saw details they did not notice while standing too high. Both points of view were needed, and that was exactly the meaning. Aura climbed up beside him, stood silently, then said, "Lena wants to build a new house. She asks you to help with the calculations. Tomorrow." Tara says the metal from the northern rocks melts differently than ordinary metal. She wants to understand why. After Lena. And also a messenger from Garo says their commander wants to show you something in the mountains. Darius smiled. "So there is enough work." Aura looked at him. "Are you satisfied?" He thought. "I am busy. And when I am busy with useful work, that is better than satisfied." Aura was silent, then quietly said what she had not said directly before. "It is good that you got lost in our forest." Darius looked at her. "It is good that you found me." Below, the village lived its life. Tara struck with her hammer. Lena was explaining something to her friends with a piece of bark in her hands. Bora loudly argued with someone by the well. Vera walked across the yard with the look of a person who had a plan. The world of giants accepted the small builder. Not because he was exceptional, not because he was chosen, but because he came with open hands, ready to build, not take. And it turned out that this was the greatest size of all possible. The journey to the northern rocks took 2 days. Darius rode on horseback, more precisely, sat in a special basket that Aura carried on her shoulder with the same ease with which an ordinary person carries a small bag. At first it was humiliating, then it became simply convenient. In the end, when each of Aura's steps covered a distance Darius would have walked in 3, arguing with physics was pointless. Tara and 2 guards went with them, and the messenger from Garo, the young one whose name was Vash. He turned out to be surprisingly talkative, and in 2 days of travel managed to tell Darius half the history of his tribe through a mixture of gestures, simple words, and drawings on the ground during stops. The forest changed as they moved north. The trees became lower and sparser. Stone came out to the surface more and more often, first as separate boulders, then as whole slabs, then as vertical walls from which roots stuck out like hands from water. On the second day, the landscape changed completely. The forest remained behind. Ahead opened a stone amphitheater, a wide basin surrounded by cliffs, with black outcrops of rock all around the perimeter and a bluish gleam in those places where the sun fell at a direct angle. Darius asked to be lowered to the ground. He approached the nearest wall, ran his palm over the surface. The stone was cold, not just cold, but abnormally cold for a day when the sun was shining brightly enough. And under his fingers there was a slight vibration, almost indistinguishable, like a distant bell strike that had almost faded. "Here," Vash said and pointed to the lower section of the cliff, where the rock had a different color, not black, but dark blue, almost violet at the edges. Tara was already standing nearby and examining the metal outcrop. She touched it with her tool, a short chisel, and knocked off a small piece. Caught it, weighed it on her palm, then handed it to Darius. He took it, the same abnormal lightness, the same coldness, and now, holding the piece on his palm, he felt one more thing. The metal was pulling slightly to the side, not strongly, barely noticeably, as if there were a tiny compass inside it, constantly striving somewhere north. Darius slowly turned around his axis, holding the piece on his outstretched palm. The pull changed depending on the direction. "It is a magnet," he muttered. Ora bent down. "What?" "A magnet. Metal that pulls toward the north." He raised his gaze. "Do you have this word?" Ora translated to Tara. Tara frowned and answered something. She says, "We know such metal. But this one is different. An ordinary magnet only pulls iron. And this one." Tara said something else, more slowly. Ora was silent, searching for the word. "This one pulls everything." Darius looked at the piece in his palm. "Everything," she says. "Once she brought one like this to the village. Metal things crawled to it by themselves. Even wooden objects with metal parts moved." Darius nodded slowly. His mind had already begun to work in the direction that always preceded a big idea, quickly, almost without words, in pure images and connections. Metal with directed attraction. Light, cold, with a constant pull toward the north. If its properties were stable, it was not just a rare material. It was a tool. They spent the next 2 days in the basin. Darius did not just study the metal, he tested it. First, he checked how far the attraction spread. It turned out unexpectedly far. A small piece the size of a fist noticeably pulled iron objects from a distance of 2 or 3 meters. Then he checked its directionality. The metal always pulled north, but if heated, the pull temporarily disappeared. And when it cooled again, it returned. Then he checked its strength. Tara struck the piece with her heaviest hammer, and the metal endured without a crack. The chisel left only a scratch. Then the most interesting thing, he checked what happened if 2 pieces were held close to each other. They either attracted or repelled each other, depending on orientation. Darius sat and looked at 2 pieces of metal that held themselves at a distance from each other, without support, and thought. Ora looked at his face. "You have already come up with something, yes?" she asked. "Several things," he answered cautiously. "What things?" He raised his gaze. "A lifting mechanism without a rope. A door that closes by itself. An alarm system that reacts to approaching metal weapons. A compass for huntresses so they do not lose direction in the dense forest." Pause. "And something else." "What?" Darius placed the piece on his palm and looked at the cliff. "Is there a lot of this metal here?" Vash answered without translation with a gesture that meant very much. Darius nodded. "Then we need to make an agreement with Garo about mining." The Garo commander met them at the foot of the eastern cliff. In daylight, without a weapon in his hands, he looked different than in battle. Large, yes. Heavy, yes. But in his movements, there was the weariness of a person who had been carrying too much for a long time. His name was Gorn. He immediately approached Darius without ceremony and said something directly. Ora translated. He says, "You are the only small person I have seen, but you think faster than my best warriors. That is strange." "Tell him," Darius answered, "that size does not prevent thinking. Sometimes it helps the opposite. Small ones are forced to search for other ways." Gorn listened to the translation. Nodded. "You want stone from our cliffs," he said directly. "Metal. Blue. It is ours. I know. That is why I am speaking, not taking." Gorn was silent. "What do you propose?" Darius thought for several seconds. "Your weapons are dull. I mean not bad. Just crude. You take by force where one can take by precision." Gorn frowned. "Continue. If you give me access to the metal, I will make a new tool for your blacksmiths. Not a weapon, a tool for creating weapons. You will get blades that cut better, tips that fly more accurately, fastenings that do not break at the worst possible moment." Gorn was silent. "And does Vera know about this proposal?" he finally asked. "Vera knows I am here." "That is not an answer." "No," Darius agreed. "Vera does not know about the specific proposal. But Vera trusts my judgment." Gorn looked at him for a long time. "The small one says Vera trusts the way a big one says an army stands behind me." Darius almost smiled. "That is an army, just of another kind." Gorn snorted briefly, then said, "Good. The metal can be taken. But I want to see what you are doing. And I want your master," he nodded at Tara, "to teach our blacksmiths too." Tara, without waiting for the translation, looked at Gorn, then nodded briefly. And that, apparently, satisfied everyone. The next 3 weeks became the busiest since Darius's arrival. He developed a scheme for mining the metal, not mass mining, but careful mining, so as not to destroy the structure of the cliff. Tara and 2 Garo blacksmiths worked together for the first time in the history of both tribes, at first cautiously, with distrust, then more and more freely. because the language of metal and fire turned out to be the same for everyone. The first thing Darius asked them to make was guide blocks with magnetic inserts. The principle was simple. A metal load passing through a block with an insert of blue metal slowed down when approaching the upper point and accelerated when moving downward. This meant that the lifting mechanism required significantly less effort to hold weight suspended. When the first mechanism worked and Gorn used it to lift with one hand a log of the weight that usually required 4 people to handle, he stood for a long time and looked. Then said something. Vash translated without aura. He had already learned enough common words. He says, "This is not metal. This is thought placed into metal." Darius looked at Gorn. "Have you heard something similar before?" Tara said the same thing, Vash said. Darius laughed. For the first time in a long while, truly, without fatigue and calculation. Simply because it was funny and good at the same time. On the 3rd week, Gorn invited Darius to his fire. Not for negotiations, just to talk. It was strange and unexpectedly pleasant to sit by the fire with a huge warrior who could have crushed Darius like a beetle and talk about things that had nothing to do with war and trade. Gorn spoke with pauses, slowly, sometimes asking Vash again about words. It turned out that he was not just a commander. He was also something like the historian of his tribe, a person who remembered legends and made sure they did not disappear. In the past, Gorn said, small people lived with us in the north. Not as prisoners. They came themselves, built houses, taught ours to make things. I have heard about this. Then one day they left. All at once. At night. Why? Gorn was silent for a long time. The legend says, they found the road home. A road they did not know until they had built enough here. Darius looked at the fire. What does that mean? I do not know. That is what the legend says. Gorn looked at him. You also build enough. Darius did not answer. But something in those words stayed with him like a splinter that does not hurt, but is felt. The road home. He thought about it for a long time afterward. Thought at night, looking at the starry sky through the holes in the huge crowns. Thought in the morning, when he walked to the forge. Thought between work, when his hands were busy and his head was free. What does it mean to find the road home? He could try to find a way out of the forest. But was what lay outside still his home? When they returned to the village after 3 weeks, Darius immediately felt something had changed. Not badly, just differently. Lena met him at the gates with shining eyes and immediately dragged him to look at the new house she had begun to design herself, with lever gates and a double roof for heat insulation. Tara had been thinking about new uses for the blue metal even on the road and now wanted to discuss them immediately. Bora, and this was the most surprising, came up to Darius and silently handed him a wooden mug with hot decoction. It was her way of saying something she did not know how to say in words. Darius accepted the mug. Thank you, Bora. She muttered something and left. Bora walked beside him and could barely hold back a smile. What did she say? Darius asked. She says, you walked for a long time. Probably hungry. Is that all? No. She also says, good that you returned. Darius looked at Bora's retreating back. From her, that is a lot. Very much, Bora confirmed. Vera summoned him the next day. This time not for a council and not for a ceremony. She sat alone, without elders, without guards. On the table was that same old leather map she had shown him before the first Garo attack. But now there were new marks on it by Lena's hand, which had already managed to draw in the northern cliffs and new routes. Sit, Vera said. Darius sat. She looked at the map for a long time without beginning the conversation, then said, you changed us. Not me. You yourselves. No. She shook her head. Before you, we lived the same way as our mothers. And their mothers. Every year the same thing. Hunting. Garo. Winter. Hunting again. Pause. Now Lena builds a house with calculations. Tara invents new mechanisms herself. Even Bora began asking why the trough is made exactly this way and not otherwise. That is good. Yes. But it means that they now see farther than before. And when you begin to see farther. She fell silent. You want to go farther? Darius finished. Yes. A long pause. You are thinking about leaving, Vera said. Not a question, a statement. Darius did not pretend. I am. Not now. But I am thinking. Vera nodded. I knew. From the first day I saw, you are not one who stays forever. How? Because you always look beyond the horizon. Even when you work, part of you is somewhere there. Darius was silent. But while I am here completely. I know, Vera said. That is why I am speaking now, and not when you are already at the gates. She turned the map around. Show me what you want to build while you are here. Darius looked at the map, then took charcoal, and began to draw. He drew for a long time. Vera did not hurry him. She simply watched as lines, dots, and schemes appeared under the charcoal. First, a system of signal posts between the village and Garo. Small towers with mirrors of polished metal. 3 turns of the mirror, threat. 2, trade wagon. 1, simply a communication check. No messengers, no lost messages. Then a warehouse on neutral territory for exchange between the 2 tribes. With a covered passage, protected from rain and snow. With constant guards from both sides. Then a road from the village to the cliffs. Not a highway, simply a cleared and marked path, wide enough for several people side by side, with marks on trees and stones every 100 meters. Then new residential houses. Not larger, but better. With ventilation, insulated floors, double roofs, and built-in hearths that heat not one corner, but the whole room. And finally, the last thing. He drew a building in the center of the village. Separate, with a large open space inside, shelves along the walls, and a wide work table. Vera looked. What is this? This is a place for knowledge. Like a school? Not only. All schemes, drawings, calculations will be kept here. Everything we have come up with. So that when Lena becomes older, she can pass it on to her children. So that knowledge does not disappear together with a person. Vera looked at the drawing for a long time. We do not have such a custom. That is exactly why it needs to be started. Pause. Then Vera did something Darius had not expected. She took the charcoal from his hand and placed on the scheme, beside the building of knowledge, a small sign, the very one tattooed on the wrist of every woman of the tribe at birth. A sign of belonging. This is ours, she said simply. The house of knowledge was built by the whole village. Not because Darius asked. Simply when he began marking the foundation, Lena appeared nearby with a tool. Then Tara. Then 4 workers. Then 2 more. Bora came last. Stood for a while, watching the work proceed. Then took the heaviest log and carried it where Darius pointed. No one said anything unnecessary. They simply built. The walls rose in a week. The roof in 3 days. Tara made the shelves from metal plates, strong and even. The work table from a whole trunk that had been found fallen in the forest and already partly dried. Darius's schemes were the first to go onto the shelves. Then Lena's drawings. Then Tara's drawing for a new type of joint for pulley mechanisms. Then something unexpected. Bora brought old leather with drawings. It turned out she had been sketching hunting routes since youth, the locations of animal trails, places where water could be found in the dry season. She had simply never shown them to anyone. She placed her notes beside Darius's drawings. Said nothing, but it was more eloquent than any words. Knowledge began to gather in one place. For the first time, among everything Darius did with the blue metal, the compass turned out to be the simplest and the most unexpectedly important. A small disc of ordinary metal. In the center, on an axis, a thin plate of blue. A leather case. A glass covering. This was the hardest part, because Tara had never worked with glass, and the first 3 attempts produced either something too thick or cracked. The 4th worked. Darius gave the first compass to Gorn. He took it in his huge palms, carefully, like a fragile thing. Opened the case. Watched how the needle slowly aligned. Turned left, the needle moved right. Turned right, the needle moved left. Aligned north again. Gorn looked for a long time, then said something quietly. Vash translated. He says, "This is the smallest thing of everything you have made, and the most important." Why? Darius asked. Gorn answered himself slowly, with pauses. We lost hunters in the dense forest in winter. Every year. Snow covers the sun. Trees cover the stars. Now we will not lose them. Darius nodded. How many have you lost in recent years? Gorn raised 3 fingers. 3 people. 3 huge people who simply did not return from the forest because they lost direction. Darius looked at the compass in Gorn's hands. Sometimes the smallest device solves the biggest problem. One night Darius could not sleep. This happened rarely, but it happened. Usually when too many tasks spun in his head at once and interfered with each other like gears that could not find the right rhythm. He went outside. The village slept. Only the watchwoman at the gate nodded to him calmly. Darius had long been known by sight by everyone, including the night shift. He walked to the edge of the village, where the forest began almost immediately beyond the last houses, and sat on a large root. The silence was dense and alive. Then he heard a sound. Not an animal, not the wind. Something rhythmic and low, almost on the edge of hearing, felt more by the chest than by the ears. He stood up, listened. The sound came from the forest, from the west. Darius took several steps toward the trees, then stopped. Reason said, "Do not go alone. Night, you do not know what is there." He returned to the watchwoman and explained something with gestures. She frowned, called a second one. Together they approached the edge of the forest and stood listening. Then one of them said something quietly. The second answered just as quietly. Then both looked at Darius. "What?" he asked. The first pronounced slowly, simply, "Old sound. Was long ago, very long ago. Grandmothers said, this is the earth remembering." Darius looked into the darkness of the forest. The earth remembers what? The watchwoman thought. Those who built before. In the morning he questioned Aura. At first she brushed it off. Children's stories, she said. Grandmother's legends. But Darius insisted. And Aura told him. According to the tribe's legend, very long ago there lived in these forests a people who could speak with the earth. Not magic, they simply understood its language. The language of stone, water, metal, wood. They built not just houses, they built connections between things. And the earth answered them. When they left, the earth still remembered them for some time. Sometimes, especially at night, the old structures began to sound, that same low rhythmic sound. It is just stone vibration from the wind, Darius said. Maybe, Aura agreed, then was silent. But there was no wind yesterday. Darius did not answer, because she was right. Several days later, while digging the expanded foundation for the House of Knowledge, the workers came upon something unexpected. Beneath a layer of earth and roots, stone. Not just stone, worked stone, with even edges and regular notches. Darius asked them to clear it. The deeper they dug, the more obvious it became. Beneath the village, something had already been built. Long ago, very long ago. The foundation was not natural rock, but laid blocks with precise fitting. A channel underground, narrow but man-made. In one place, a ring of that same blue metal embedded in the stone. Darius stood in the pit, which reached up to his chin, and looked at the ring. His fingers touched the metal. A slight vibration, the same as in the rocks to the north. Only here it was weaker, like an echo of something long fallen silent. He raised his gaze. Around him stood Aura, Lena, Tara, and several workers, all looking down with the same expression, amazement mixed with something like recognition. "This was always here," Aura said quietly. "Yes," Darius answered. "So those who built before. Built here," he finished. "On the same place." A long silence. Then Lena said something quietly. Darius did not understand the word, but understood the intonation. What did she say? He asked Aura. Aura translated slowly, as if thinking it over herself. She says, "Maybe they did not leave. Maybe they simply became smaller." Darius looked at the ring of blue metal, at the carved lines in the stone, at the precise fitting of the blocks, which required not brute force, but fine calculation, and thought about Gorn's words. They found the road home when they had built enough. What does it mean to build enough? He did not know the answer, but he knew that now he was searching for it. That night they sat by the river again. Not for the first time anymore. It had become a habit that no one called a habit aloud, because sometimes the best things are held precisely by silent agreement. Aura sat low, propping her chin with her hand. Darius on the stone nearby. "You are thinking about what was found underground," she said. "Yes." "And about what Gorn said." "Yes." Pause. "Are you afraid?" Darius thought honestly. "No. But something has changed." "What?" "Before, I thought, I need to survive here. Then, I need to be useful. Then, I need to build a system. And now I am thinking about something else." "About what?" He looked at the water. "About the fact that all this is not accidental. That I ended up exactly here. That beneath your village lie structures of my people. That the metal in your rocks is the same as what they used. You think something led you here?" "I do not know. I do not believe in destiny." "Then what?" Darius was silent. "I believe that smart people once already found the right place, and left traces in it. And if another smart person accidentally ends up there too, that is not magic. It is simply that smart people often come to the same conclusions." Aura looked at him for a long time. "You speak complicatedly." "I know, but I understood." "Really?" "Yes. You are saying, you came here because this is the right place for you." Darius looked at her. Something like that. Aura nodded. Then quietly. Then stay. He did not answer immediately. He simply looked at the water, where the moon broke into 1,000 pieces and gathered into one again. Then said, "Until I build enough, leaving is impossible." Aura raised her head. And then? Darius looked at her. "Then we will see." And in that "we will see" there was more than in any direct answer. They both knew it. The excavations took a week. Darius directed carefully, not like an archaeologist, because he did not know such a word, but with the same instinct. Do not hurry, do not break, do not pull what is holding. Each layer of earth was removed carefully, set aside, examined. On the third day, they found the first room. Not large, about 3 by 3 meters by the standards of an ordinary person. The ceiling was low. The walls were made of the same work blocks. In the corner, the remains of a wooden structure, long rotted away, but having left a trace in the form of dark stains on the floor. Notches on the wall. Darius descended first. Not because he was braver. Simply the room was built for his size. He stood inside and slowly moved the torch along the walls. The notches turned out to be not just decoration. They were schemes. Rough, made directly in the stone with a sharp tool, but quite readable. He recognized the lever, the same principle he had explained to Lena. Recognized the pulley mechanism. Recognized a water channel with slope indicators. And then he saw something he did not recognize. In the far corner, there was a scheme unlike the others. Not a tool, not a mechanism, more like a map, but not of terrain, more like a map of something else. Lines, points, concentric circles with marks on the edges. Darius looked at it for a long time, then called Aura. She could not fit into the room, the ceiling was too low, but she lay down at the edge of the pit, hanging her head down, and looked by the light of the torch. "Do you see this?" Darius pointed at the scheme with the circles. "I see. Do you know what it is?" Aura was silent for a long time. "No, but it looks like." She fell silent. "Like what?" "Like a map of the starry sky. The kind our priests make for rituals." Darius looked at the scheme again. A star map. Or something using the same logic of arrangement, center, periphery, points around a circle. He did not yet know what it meant. But he knew for certain. This was not just wall decoration. It was an instruction. On the 5th day, they found the second room. It was larger than the first, about twice as large, and connected to it by a short passage, narrow enough that Aura could not crawl through even with great desire. Darius went alone. The second room turned out to be a workshop. Around the perimeter were stone ledges, clearly serving as tables or shelves. On them were objects. Most had crumbled into dust from time, but several had survived. The first was a metal cylinder the length of a palm, sealed at both ends. Something inside rolled when moved, quietly, like liquid, but the cylinder was soldered shut. The second was a plate of blue metal, but not simply a piece of, or processed. Thin, with even edges and engraved lines on the surface. The lines formed a grid with intersection points. Darius immediately recognized a coordinate system. Someone once used this plate as a measuring instrument. The third object was the strangest. A small figure made of the same blue metal. Not a person, not an animal, something abstract, with several planes polished to a mirror shine. Darius took it in his hand and felt the familiar vibration, but stronger than from an ordinary piece of metal, and directed not to the north, but downward. Straight downward, into the earth. He held the figure and looked under his feet. Something was below. Tara studied the found plate for 3 days. Darius did not hurry her. He knew that a blacksmith had her own pace for working with unfamiliar material. First you look, then you touch, then you test for reaction, and only then do you begin to understand. On the 4th day, Tara came to him herself. Placed the plate on the table, her own drawings beside it. Then began explaining quickly, almost without pauses, through gestures and words mixed together, with an excitement Darius had never seen in her before. Aura translated, barely keeping up. She says, "The lines on the plate are not just a grid. It is a system for measuring metal in the rock. The distances between the lines change depending on concentration. The closer the lines, the more metal there is in that place. Like a compass, only for finding deposits?" Darius clarified. "Yes," she says. She checked, took the plate to the northern rocks. Where the lines thickened, there was more metal. It matched exactly. Darius looked at the plate. "This means they knew how to find deposits not blindly." She says, "They knew how to do more." "Look." Tara pointed at the corner of the plate, where the lines did not just thicken, but converged into one point. She says, "Here the lines point downward. Beneath the village. Directly under the room where you found the figure." Darius slowly raised his gaze. "There is something else there." She says, "Yes, a lot." The council gathered in the evening. This time Darius spoke himself in the language of the tribe, already confidently enough to manage without Aura's constant help. "There is another level under the foundation, possibly more than one. There may be tools, schemes, materials there. What was left by those who built here before us?" Bora immediately asked, "Why do we need someone else's old junk?" "Because someone else's old junk may turn out to be better than our new things," Darius answered. Bora pressed her lips together, but did not object. Vera looked at the map with Tara's marks. "Are you sure this is safe?" "No," Darius answered honestly. "I am not sure. That is why I suggest digging slowly and carefully. And if something goes wrong, we stop. And if we find something we cannot understand, we study until we understand." Vera was silent. "And if we find something dangerous?" Darius looked at the chief. "Then it is better that we find it than someone else who will not be careful." A long pause in the hall. Then Vera nodded. "Dig." They descended to the third level after 5 days. The passage down was narrow, clearly made for people of ordinary height. Darius walked with a torch. Lena outside held the rope in case something went wrong. The third level was different. Not a workshop, not a storage room. A large hall with a high ceiling, high for people of ordinary height, that is, about 4 meters. The walls were smooth, clearly polished. On the floor was a pattern laid out of 2 kinds of stone, dark and light. Geometric, complex, with repeating elements. In the center of the hall was a table of blue metal. On it were objects. Darius walked toward them slowly, holding the torch high. First, several metal plates similar to the one found earlier, but with more complex schemes. He put them into his bag carefully, without examining them now, later. Second, something resembling a book. Not a paper one, sheets of very thin metal, fastened along one edge. On each sheet were schemes and signs. The language was unfamiliar, but the logic was familiar. It was technical documentation. Instructions. Third, 3 cylinders, similar to the one found above, but larger. On each were notches. And fourth, at the far end of the table. Darius stopped. It was a mechanism. Small, the size of 2 fists. Made of blue metal. Several moving parts connected by the finest axles. It was not broken. Darius felt this immediately. Simply stopped. Like a clock that had not been wound for a very long time. He reached out, touched it, and the mechanism came to life. Not with an explosion, not with a flash. It simply began to move slowly, with a quiet ringing, as if stretching its joints after a long sleep. The moving parts took their positions. Something inside turned, and then light appeared in the hall. Not from the torch, its own. Weak, bluish, coming from the lines in the floor. Those same patterns of 2 kinds of stone were glowing. Barely noticeable, but enough to see the whole hall without the torch. Darius slowly lowered his hand. "Aura," he called upward. "Here," came from above. "Tell everyone that I am all right." "What is there?" Darius looked at the glowing floor, at the metal book, at the living mechanism on the table. "Tell them that we found a library." Darius spent the next 2 weeks mostly underground. Not in isolation, Lena came down every day, brought food, and took away plates for study. Aura stood watch above and passed on questions from Vera. Tara sometimes lay at the entrance to the passage, and Darius handed her separate metal parts for analysis. But he did the deciphering work himself. Because the language on the metal sheets, for all its unfamiliarity, had one key property. It was engineering language. Not literary, not religious, not historical, technical. And technical language everywhere obeys the same logic. There is an object, there is an action, there is a result. Arrows show direction. Numbers show quantity or order. Repeating signs show standard elements. He started with the simple. Found a scheme he recognized, a pulley mechanism. Compared the signs beside familiar elements. Found a repeating designation. It was the verb to lift. Then found a scheme of a water channel. Found flow and direct. Then a scheme of a crossbow. Found draw and release. By the end of the first week, he had about 20 words. By the end of the second, about 80. Not enough to read freely, but enough to understand the main thing. The first pages of the book were technical instructions. How to work with blue metal, temperatures, tools, alloy proportions. Darius passed these pages to Tara, and she studied them with such greed that she stopped sleeping normally. The middle pages were maps, not of terrain, but of metal deposits. Several points were marked with special signs, probably the richest deposits. One of them was located, apparently, beneath the hall itself. The last pages were different. Not technical. Darius read them slowly, word by word, with mistakes and gaps, the way one reads in a foreign language when one knows half the words and guesses the second half. The meaning came together gradually. It was a diary. More precisely, the last entries of someone who was leaving. He read, copied onto bark in his own words, then reread again. This is what he got. We are leaving not because we want to. We are leaving because we have built enough for those who will come after. The big live long. The small live smart. This is not weakness and not strength. These are different ways to hold the world. When the big and the small hold the world together, it holds stronger. We leave tools. We leave knowledge. We leave a path. The one who finds this place will find himself. Because the right places find the right people. Darius sat with this bark in his hands for a long time. A very long time. Then rose and went upstairs. He came to Vera at night. She was not sleeping. Darius already knew that the chief often did not sleep at night. She sat by the fire, thinking about something of her own. He sat opposite her, placed the bark with the notes between them. Vera read slowly, Aura translating in a low voice. Then she was silent for a long time. So they left this for us, she finally said. For those who will come. For us included. And for you. Darius nodded. For me especially. Because I am one of them. Or their descendants. Vera looked at the fire. The right places find the right people, she repeated quietly. Yes. Do you believe in that? Darius thought. I believe that they knew. Someday someone would come here. And they left everything so that this someone could continue. And you are continuing. I am trying. Vera turned to him. Then I will tell you something. She was silent for a while. When you came, I thought, a small stranger. Curious, but a stranger. We will let him go in a month. But you did not leave. And every day you stayed, something changed. Not only outside. Inside. In me. In us. In the tribe. She looked straight at him. Lena thinks differently than a year ago. Tara laughs. She never laughed before. Bora asks why, although before she accepted everything as it was. You did this. They did it themselves. You gave them a reason. A long pause. You once asked me what it means to build enough, Darius said. I did not know the answer then. Now I think I know. And what does it mean? To build enough is not about houses and mechanisms. It is about people. When people beside you begin to build themselves, you have built enough. Vera looked at him for a long time, then said quietly, then you have already built enough. And in those words there was neither joy nor sadness. Just truth, which both understood. The next day Tara came to him with plates from the metal book. She had worked on them all night, and it showed. Tired eyes, hands covered in soot, but the face of a person who had found something very important. She spread the plates on the table, began explaining. Aura translated, but Tara more and more often spoke directly to Darius. He already knew the language well enough to understand the blacksmith without an intermediary. These plates are not just schemes, Tara said. They are recipes. How to mix blue metal with others to obtain different properties. What properties? This one, she poked at one scheme, gives metal that never rusts. This one, metal that is 3 times lighter than ordinary metal, but just as strong. This one, she stopped. What? Darius asked. Tara looked at the last plate. I do not understand this one yet. Something is written here about light. About storing light. Darius took the plate, looked at the scheme, then at the mechanism in his bag, the very one that had come to life in the underground hall and made the floor glow. I think, he said slowly, that I understand. Blue metal can store not only direction. It can store energy. What is energy? Darius raised his gaze. It is force that can be accumulated and used later. Tara looked at him. Like food supplies? Yes. Only for light. And for other things. Tara was silent for a long time. Then pronounced one word. What is she saying? Darius asked Aura. Aura smirked. She says, the builder found the sun in metal. It took 10 days to create the first lantern. Not because it was difficult in principle, but because they had to figure out details that were marked briefly in the scheme and in practice required trial and error. The principle was as follows. A small vessel of blue metal of a certain shape accumulated light during the day simply by standing under the open sky. At night it gave back what it had accumulated. Not brightly, more like the moon than like fire, but evenly, without smoke, without any need for oil or firewood. The first sample turned out imperfect. The light lasted only 4 hours instead of the calculated 8. Darius and Tara sat over it and analyzed the mistakes. The shape is wrong, Tara said. The wall thickness needs to be different. Or the composition of the alloy. Or both. They exchanged glances. And both laughed at the same time. Because it was a conversation between two masters who spoke the same language regardless of height, tribe, and how many years ago they had first seen each other. The second sample held light for 6 hours. The third for 9. Darius placed the fourth in the House of Knowledge. In the evening, when it grew dark, half the village gathered there. They stood and looked at the even bluish light, which did not flicker, did not smoke, and required nothing except the daytime sun. They were silent. Then Lena quietly said something. "What is she saying?" Darius asked. Aura translated with a soft smile. "She says, now we can read drawings at night. Good times have a habit of being interrupted." The messenger arrived at dawn, not from Garo, not from the neighboring forests. From the south, a stranger, a person of ordinary height, which in itself was unexpected. He reached the village on foot, clearly after several days, and looked as if the forest had not let him go, but pushed him out. The watchwomen brought him to Vera. Darius was there too, by chance or not, but he was in the hall when the messenger was brought in. The messenger saw him and froze. "You are human," he said in a language Darius understood without translation. His native language. "Yes," Darius answered. "They are looking for you." The silence in the hall became dense. "Who?" The messenger swallowed. "The Resta Trading Company. They heard rumors about a man who entered the northern forest of Tavra and did not return. They want to know whether he is alive." And he fell silent. "Continue. And they want to know what is inside there. They are equipping an expedition. A large one. With weapons." Darius looked at Vera. She looked at him. Not a word between them. But everything had been said. He turned to the messenger. "When are they setting out?" "A month. Maybe a month and a half." "How many people?" "They speak of 30. Maybe more." "Armed how?" "Well, the Resta Company is rich." Darius nodded. "You will stay here for the night. Eat, rest. Tomorrow we will talk." The messenger looked at the 3-meter women around him with the expression of a person who was still not sure he was not delirious. "Is it safe here?" "This is my home," Darius answered simply. And it was true. In the evening Darius sat alone for a long time. Aura did not come to the river. She felt that he needed to be without conversation. He thought. 30 armed people from a trading company. They were not coming for him, but for what was here. For the forest, for the metal, for the possibility of developing territory that maps marked as a blank spot. They did not know about the village yet, but when they learned, and they would learn, because such expeditions always find what they are looking for, they would not have the instinct to negotiate. They would have the instinct to take. Darius knew these people. Not personally, but by type. Trading companies work the same way. First reconnaissance, then consolidation, then the gradual displacement of everything that interfered with profit. For them, the giants would first be a threat, then an obstacle, then a target. He could not allow this. And not because he was obligated, but because this was his home. And these people were his people. Even if big, even if different. His own. He stood up and went to Vera. "They will come," he said directly. "Not Garo. People from outside. My people, if speaking precisely. But they do not know this forest, do not know you, and will not negotiate first." Vera listened. "You want us to stop them?" "No. I want them to see what they need to see before they make a decision." "What exactly?" Darius was silent for a while. "That there is already a world here. Organized, working, strong. That entering here with weapons is not just dangerous. It is pointless. And if they do not listen, then we have the passage with the platform," Darius said calmly. "And crossbows. And allies from Garo." Vera looked at him for a long time. "You do not want to fight them?" "No. Because they are your people?" "No. Because war with them will not solve the problem. After 30, 300 will come. We need to make it so they will not want to return with war." "How?" Darius smiled barely noticeably. "I am a builder, Vera. I know how to make things that speak for themselves." He took charcoal and began drawing a plan on leather. The expedition appeared 5 weeks later. Darius met them alone. At the edge of the forest, 3 hours walk from the village. He stood directly on the trail, alone, without a weapon. 32 armed people stopped before him. The expedition commander, heavy-set, with intelligent eyes and an expensive cloak, looked at him with unconcealed amazement. "Are you Darius?" "Yes. You are alive. As you can see." Pause. "The company was worried about you." "The company was worried about its investments," Darius answered calmly. "Those are different things, but I do not hold it against them." The commander frowned. "What is happening here?" Rumors spoke of monsters. Rumors spoke of the unknown. The unknown always turns into monsters in retelling. "Then who lives here?" Darius looked at him. "People. Different, but people. And they have built a world here that works." "Savages?" "No. Just big." The commander frowned even deeper. "We have heard about metal in the rocks." "You heard correctly. The company wants mining rights." "I know," Darius said. "That is why I am here. To talk about it before you enter the forest with weapons and everyone dies for nothing." The commander looked at him. "Are you threatening me?" "No. I am explaining the situation." A long pause. "Show me these people of yours," the commander finally said. "With pleasure," Darius answered, and whistled. Vera, Aura, and 10 warriors of the tribe came out of the forest on both sides. 3 meters of living reality. The 32 people of the expedition took a synchronized step back. Darius stood between 2 worlds and felt that this exact moment, this second, when fear had not yet turned either into flight or attack, was the very moment for which he had been building everything lately. "This is Vera," he said calmly, "chief of this forest. She is ready to talk. One condition, weapons stay here." The commander looked at Vera. Vera looked at the commander. Then the commander slowly removed the crossbow from his shoulder and placed it on the ground. The others followed him. Darius exhaled, and the first step was taken. The negotiations lasted 2 days. Darius worked as a translator in both directions, of language and of logic. Because the trading company thought in categories of profit and monopoly, while the tribe thought in categories of land and survival. Finding the point where these 2 systems of values gave the same answer was his work. He found it. Metal from the northern rocks in exchange for tools and materials that the tribe lacked. Not slave labor, not land lease, not the rite of passage for military detachments. Pure trade, resource for resource. The commander bargained hard, but honestly. On the second day, when the treaty was almost ready, he took Darius aside. "What are you really doing here?" he asked in a low voice. "Living," Darius answered. "That is not an answer. It is the only answer there is." The commander looked at him for a long time. "The company wants you to return. You are a valuable person. An engineer with your abilities." "Here I am an engineer too," Darius interrupted. "And here my abilities are needed more." "You are choosing them?" "I am choosing here." The commander was silent. "You understand what that means?" "I understand," Darius answered. "It means that I have built enough to know where my place is." The expedition left 3 days later with a treaty and without losses. At parting, the commander shook Darius's hand firmly, without words. Some things, even in human language, are spoken only with gestures. Darius stood at the edge of the forest and watched them leave along the trail until they disappeared behind the trees. Then he felt someone standing beside him. "Aura, they will not return with war," she said. "Not a question. They will not. They will return with trade." "Is that better?" "Much better." Aura looked at the trail. "You could have left with them." "I could have, but you did not." "No." Pause. "Why?" Darius looked at her, then looked toward the village, from where Tara's hammering in the forge could already be heard. Lena's voice, Bora's loud argument with someone by the water trough. "Because there I was a builder who gets paid," he said. "And here?" "And here I am Tyros." Aura was silent for a long time. Then very quietly, "Is the difference big?" Darius smirked. "The difference is that there you build for someone, and here you build together with someone." Aura looked at him for a long time. Then she did something she had never done before, bent down slowly and carefully, and touched her forehead to his shoulder. One short moment, then straightened. "What is that a sign of among you?" he asked quietly. "Among us it means, you have found your place." Darius looked at the forest, at the trees as tall as towers, at the sky, which here was always slightly different, denser, deeper, at the world that had accepted a person of his height, not because he was big, but because he knew how to build. And it turned out that this was the greatest thing one could know how to do.